Kamala Harris informs Netanyahu that the conflict in Gaza must be terminated and the hostages must be returned. On Thursday, Vice President Kamala Harris expressed her desire for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to expedite the process of negotiating a ceasefire agreement with Hamas in order to facilitate the return of dozens of detainees who have been held by the militants in Gaza since October 7. Harris affirmed Israel's right to self-defense during a frank and constructive conversation with Netanyahu. She also conveyed profound apprehension regarding the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and the high death toll that has occurred over the course of 9 months of conflict. President Joe Biden's long-standing message that it is time to find a conclusion to the barbaric conflict in Gaza, where more than 39,000 Palestinians have perished, was generally reiterated by Harris, with all eyes on the likely Democratic presidential nominee. However, a day after Netanyahu delivered an impassioned address to Congress in which he defended the war, declared total victory against Hamas, and made relatively little mention of ceasefire negotiations, she adopted a more assertive tone regarding the urgency of the situation. Harris informed reporters shortly after his meeting with Netanyahu that there has been encouraging progress in the negotiations to reach a resolution on this matter. And as I have just informed Prime Minister Netanyahu, it is now time to finalize this agreement. Earlier in the day, Netanyahu met separately with Biden, who has also been advocating for Israel and Hamas to reach a consensus on a 3-phase, U.S.-backed agreement to return the remaining hostages and establish an extended ceasefire. Harris stated following her encounter with Netanyahu that the conflict in Gaza is more intricate than simply supporting one side or the other. The conversation is frequently binary, despite the fact that the reality is anything but, Harris stated. Harris also denounced Hamas barbarism. Ultimately, the militant group that murdered approximately 1,200 individuals on October 7 and abducted 250 individuals from Israel is responsible for the suffering in Gaza and must reconcile with Israel, according to White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby. Kirby added that the two parties can bridge the divides, but there are issues that must be resolved that will necessitate leadership and compromise. In addition, the administration appeared to be increasing its pressure on the Israelis to not waste the opportunity to reach an agreement with Harris's forceful comments. The events that have transpired in Gaza over the past 9 months have been catastrophic. The images of dead children and desperate, hungry individuals fleeing for safety, sometimes for the second, third, or fourth time, Harris stated. We are unable to ignore these tragedies. We must refrain from becoming indifferent to the anguish. I will not remain mute. Harris condemned those who were violent or used rhetoric that praised Hamas during Netanyahu's visit to Washington, where protests by thousands were held. On Friday, Netanyahu will travel to Florida to meet with the Republican presidential nominee. He was last at the White House during the former President Donald Trump's tenure. Trump stated at a rally in North Carolina that the vice president was totally against the Jewish people prior to the Harris-Netanyahu meeting on Thursday. Harris has consistently expressed her unwavering support for Israel. A resolution opposing a UN Security Council resolution condemning Israel was introduced by her as one of her first acts in office. Her first overseas voyage of her Senate career was to Israel in early 2017. She has also discussed her personal connections to Israel, such as the time she raised money as a child to plant trees in Israel and the installation of a mezuzah near the front door of the vice president's residence in Washington, since her spouse is Jewish. She is also affiliated with pro-Israel organizations, such as the liberal J Street and the conservative American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Harris perceived the meeting with Netanyahu as an occasion to display her capacity to assume the role of commander-in-chief. Republicans are attempting to portray her as insufficient in her support for Israel, while those on the political left argue that Biden has not done enough to compel Netanyahu to end the conflict. She is currently under scrutiny. Harris's most recent one-on-one interaction with Netanyahu occurred in March 2021. However, she has participated in over 20 telephone conversations between Biden and Netanyahu. Over the years, the relationship between the centrist Democrat Biden and the conservative Likud party leader Netanyahu has been characterized by ups and downs. In what is expected to be his final White House encounter with Biden, Netanyahu reflected on their 40-year friendship and expressed gratitude to the president for his service. From a proud Jewish Zionist to a proud Irish-American Zionist, I would like to express my gratitude for your 50 years of public service and your 50 years of support for the State of Israel, Netanyahu informed Biden. A legacy-affirming accomplishment for Biden, who abandoned his re-election campaign and endorsed Harris, would be a U.S.-backed proposal to release the remaining detainees in Gaza over 3 phases. Harris may also leverage it to her advantage in her pursuit of his position. Biden and Netanyahu convened with the families of American hostages subsequent to their discussions. Jonathan Dekelchin, the father of detainee Sagui Dekelchin, stated that the families were provided with an ironclad commitment from Biden and Netanyahu to finalize the agreement. He expressed his optimism at its highest level since the release of over 100 detainees by Hamas during a provisional ceasefire in November. There are more reasons today than there have been since the last round of hostage releases that something could happen, he stated. Netanyahu is currently endeavoring to navigate his own precarious political situation. He is under pressure from the families of detainees, who are requesting a ceasefire agreement to return their loved ones, and from far-right members of his governing coalition, who are urging him to resist any agreement that could prevent Israeli forces from eliminating Hamas. Netanyahu delivered a forceful defense of Israel's actions during the conflict and attacked the International Criminal Court's allegations of Israeli war crimes during his address to a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. He argued that Israel was effectively defending our shared interests in the Middle East by keeping Americans' boots off the ground in its struggle against Iran-backed Hamas. Keep in mind that our adversaries are also your adversaries, Netanyahu stated. It is your fight, not ours. And our triumph will be your triumph. Netanyahu also disparaged the demonstrators who gathered in the vicinity of the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday, referring to them as useful idiots from Iran. On Thursday, Harris expressed her indignation at the act of some demonstrators tagging areas near the U.S. Capitol with pro-Hamas graffiti, expressing support for the militants, and burning a U.S. flag at Union Station. In a statement, Harris declared that pro-Hamas graffiti and rhetoric are abhorrent and must not be tolerated in our nation. I abhor the act of burning the American flag. The flag is a representation of the promise of America and a symbol of our nation's highest ideals. It should never be desecrated in that manner.